Seishindo Life Tools Podcast by Charlie Badenhop and Tony Paget.
Hello, everyone. Today we will be discussing how to manage what we are calling everyday anger. This is the kind of anger you would feel if someone poked you with a proverbial umbrella, such as if someone bumped into you by accident and you dropped a stack of papers, your kid spilled a drink on your computer keyboard, or someone cut you off in traffic. To be clear, we are not talking about extreme cases of misconduct by another person that might lead you to become angry, such as if someone broke into your home. The tool we present today could also be used for extreme cases, but that could make this podcast difficult to navigate. Thus, we will stick to our credo of sensible solutions for life's everyday challenges. So, Charlie, why don't you start us off with a roadmap for today's podcast?
Sure, Tony. First, I'll give a bare-bones outline of the 5-step tool we're going to use later in this podcast. And here's the bare-bones outline of the tool. Step 1, in the heat of the moment, discipline yourself to say and do as little as possible. Step 2, I ask myself, can anyone really make me angry, or do I play some role in the anger I generate? Step 3, look to uncover the positive intention of your counterpart. Step 4, rethink what took place so that you can better take in the actions of your counterpart. Step 5, consider what you will need to do to cultivate the kind of relationship you would like to have with your counterpart going forward. And of course, we'll cover the 5 steps in detail later on in the podcast.
That sounds great, Charlie. I think you were also going to give a bit of the theory behind today's tool, so how about starting off with that?
Sure. I hear from many people that they see ever-increasing expressions of anger in their everyday work life and personal life, and certainly we see lots of evidence of this in the news. So I think that understanding the process of anger is an important topic for all of us to take a closer look at. If you take the time to delve deeper into your own anger, you will often find that you are seriously limiting your ability to feel and express your full range of emotions. In the process of limiting yourself, you become the victim of your emotions. You might, for instance, be angry because you feel that someone else should be punished or held accountable. But in the long run, your anger will only wind up punishing yourself because you'll wind up finding it harder and harder to feel a heartfelt connection with other people. I say this because I find it very common for people to take the anger they are holding in regard to one person and generalizing that anger out to numerous other people that they come in contact with. So, for instance, you might wind up getting angry about the way you're treated at work by your boss. But if you take a look, you'll usually find that your anger towards your boss spills over into your relationships with other people at work as well. Your anger towards your boss will wind up limiting your ability to build the kind of relationships that will lead to you getting the respect and appreciation you truly desire. And another point is this: when it's all said and done, I believe that when we delve deeper into our emotions, we almost always find that our strongest and most habitual responses cover up other feelings that we're not fully aware of. When we feel hurt, disrespected, abandoned, or sad, we often tend to cover up these feelings and lose touch with them. And as a result of this covering up, we wind up expressing anger or resentment instead. You see, when we find ways to come in contact with and better understand our deeper emotions, we invariably find that we've been neglecting some form of pain or discomfort. When we neglect or simply don't notice our deeper emotional reactions, we lose the ability to express our full range of emotions. And in the process, we find that by consistently expressing only one segment of our entire emotional range, we limit our ability to be happy and feel at ease with ourselves and with those that we interact with. What I tend to find myself is this: the angrier people feel, the more helpless they feel. I say this because so often people who are angry at someone feel like they were powerless to stop what took place.
So, Charlie, can I give you an example, and can you let me know how that leads to helplessness? Let's say my kid spills a drink on me while we're out to dinner. How would a sense of helplessness relate to the anger I was feeling?
Well, just talking in generalities here, when something happens that we don't want to happen, and we feel that our behavior at the time was proper,
Right.
then we usually have a sense of something taking place that is outside of our control, and thus we tend to feel somewhat helpless.
Okay.
Sometimes when I'm in a restaurant and see a family with a young child, I sense that some sort of calamity will almost certainly take place. The child, for instance, grabs the menu out of the hands of his mother, and then he notices another young child sitting nearby, and he starts to wave the menu at them. The drinks get served, and I'm almost certain that at some point the child will wind up spilling one of the drinks.
Yep, for sure.
So, what's a parent to do? Children can at times be a challenge to control. But if I were the parent in the scenario I just described, I'd be wanting to pay more attention to understanding how to help my child be calmer in general.
Uh-huh.
As the parent, I would feel some definite responsibility for the actions of the child. So if the drink spills, I would be wanting to consider my role in what took place rather than feeling helpless in regard to having my child be a bit more subdued. I also feel that anger and the desire to punish another person often go hand in hand. The same with the desire for revenge. Anger and getting even tend to be close cousins.
So, Charlie, are you saying because someone feels helpless or blameless, they want to right the wrong by punishing someone or getting revenge?
Yes, in general, I think that can be a common reaction. Anger tends to lead people to feel that they are right and the other person is wrong. All very cut and dried and very little room for alternative opinions. So anger tends to limit your ability to consider alternatives other than punishing or assigning blame.
I see.
Another thing I believe is that anger is often a sign that we want to actually be closer to someone. For instance, when we're angry at a parent, a child, or some other loved one.
Well, that's an interesting point, but what about with strangers and that guy who cut me off in traffic, for example? Are you saying I want to get closer to him? Sounds like that's stretching things a bit, no?
Well, if the guy cut you off in traffic, you most likely already got a little bit too close to him.
That's true.
But what I'm talking about is not random events with strangers. I'm talking about when we get angry with those we love or are close to, or we'd like to be close to.
Okay, makes sense.
In our personal relationships, I would say that our anger tends to block us from feeling the intimacy and love we'd really like to be feeling.
Mm-hmm.
So when we punish others and stay angry at the other person, we actually punish ourselves with our anger.
Right.
You see, I think, for instance, with our children, we have the responsibility as a parent to redirect them at times. And I think it's important that we do so, but punishing, to me, has a negative connotation that I look to not take on. You know, because anger is like an engine that never stops running. And anger wears you out and leaves you feeling depleted because the angrier you are, the more your system fails to slow down and come to a place of rest.
Mm-hmm.
Another important point I'd like to make is this. Anger creates tunnel vision, and tunnel vision makes us less aware of the world around us and makes us feel tense and thus less protected and taken care of. When we focus on the object of our anger, we miss much of the rest that's all around us. You can usually tell by looking at a person whether they're angry or not. Beyond the facial expression, anger leaves us with a particular energy output that will tend to keep emotionally balanced people away from us. And the mirror image of this is also true. Anger will attract us to other angry people, kind of like two magnets attracted to each other.
Interesting.
One thing I want to be clear in saying, though, is this. It's not wrong to get angry. A little bit of anger, like a little bit of any other emotion, might just serve you at times. For instance, feeling angry might lead you to stand up for yourself and your opinions and beliefs, and that can be a good thing, especially if you usually find this difficult to do.
Wow, great stuff, Charlie. Thanks for that introduction. I think that helps our listeners put things into perspective. So how about if we dive right into the tool?
Sure. With the tool, let me set up the context for how and when to use this tool. Today I'm going to assume that I have just had a conversation with my boss, and she talked to me with a good deal of disdain and disrespect, and I'm angered by what she said. And in most instances, when you're angry, you have already lost your ability to react in a well-intentioned manner, and thus that leads us to the first step in this tool.
Mm-hmm.
Step 1, in the heat of the moment, discipline yourself to say and do as little as possible. And I know this might not be at all easy to do, but I think that in most everyday instances it's crucial. So in regard to my boss talking to me in a really harsh manner, I simply reply something like, "Okay, sorry, maybe we can revisit this conversation sometime in the near future." I say this to my boss because I realize that I'm unlikely to respond in a way right now that will lead us to clearing up the issues she brought up. In reacting as little as possible, I've bought myself some time, and I can now take this time to contemplate the next 4 steps in this tool.
Okay, good. That allows us really to buy some extra time and go away and think about the best response possible rather than having a knee-jerk reaction which could lead to making things worse. I think that's probably good advice in general, Charlie, but particularly when you're angry, yeah? Okay, that's step 1. And how about step 2?
Step 2 is you ask yourself, can anyone else really make me angry, or do I play some role in the anger I generate? So after taking a bit of time to calm down, in the case of my boss, I ask myself, is she really capable of making me angry, or do I play some role in the anger I generate? In other words, short of putting a gun to my head, my boss does not really have the power to make me angry. You see, when we're angry at people without realizing it, we're giving them a lot of power by believing they are capable of making us angry. And the more power you confer on another person, the less powerful you will feel yourself. Somehow my boss has tapped into something about me and the way I am in the world, and I want to be able to understand more about my reaction, which leads me to the 3rd step in this tool.
But before we go into the next step, Charlie, if I could just make a comment here, it seems to me that after using this tool a few times, you would simply take a moment to realize that somehow you are playing a role in making yourself angry, and it's just not the other person's fault. Am I correct here?
Yes, indeed. After a while, this step becomes a given, and you might not even have to actually go through this step anymore.
Okay, good. Thanks for clarifying that. You were going to go on to step 3?
Step 3 is I look to uncover the positive intention of my counterpart. You see, as always, I find that my getting upset coincides with my inability to think about the positive intention my counterpart had in mind. And I think this is even more so when people get angry, and certainly more so when I get angry. So in the case of the harsh conversation with my boss, choosing to believe that she did indeed have a positive intention in mind, an intention that was meant to be respectful of the both of us, I ask myself what I think her positive intention likely was. And in taking a moment to think about this, I quickly come up with some thoughts I've had before in various other circumstances with other people. I'm guessing that my boss feels her position in the company gets ever so much shakier when I'm not performing at my best, and I'm guessing that at times she feels like I make her job more difficult than it needs to be.
And Charlie, I'm guessing that, feeling this to be true, I'm wondering if the anger isn't somewhat covering up some of the embarrassment and insecurity you might have likely been feeling.
Yes, I said that up top. Often our anger covers up other emotions, and of course that's true for me as well as for everyone else.
Sure.
So, sticking with positive intention, I go ahead and assume that my boss's positive intention was to find a way to have a better working relationship with me, a relationship built on respect and appreciation. And that's an intention that fits the both of us equally well.
Very good point. I believe that means we can go on to step 4?
Yes, step 4 is we meant to rethink what took place so that you can better take in the actions of your counterpart. So, in this case, I decide to reword what my boss said to me. I decide that if she had been better able to tap into her positive intention when talking to me, she would have likely said something like this. Please think your new ideas through before tossing them out, and please do your best to critique others' ideas in a way that comes across as solution-oriented rather than negative or elitist. If you do this, we will have a much better working relationship. I realize that there is some definite truth in this statement, And hearing it like this, I feel much more at ease.
Yeah, that's interesting, Charlie. In this step, you said rethink what took place so that you can better take in the actions of your counterpart. How about the example of a child spilling a drink? How would we use this step in that example?
Well, in regard to a child spilling a drink, my rethinking would involve the following. First, I would be pretty sure that they didn't do it on purpose.
Right.
And that likely they are just a bit too overly excited by being out in a fancy restaurant.
Sure, and if you look at it that way, who could really get angry? So, okay, thanks for clarifying that. I believe that means we can go on to step 5?
Yes, step 5 is to consider what you'll need to do to cultivate the kind of relationship you would like to have with your counterpart going forward. So in regard to the harsh conversation with my boss, I take some time to consider what she said to me. And when I do this, I concentrate on how I reworded or rethought what she said, rather than focusing on the way she said what she said.
Okay.
My boss said that I am careless, and what I can learn from that is that my enthusiasm for new ideas and new initiatives often means that I have not clearly thought things through. So I realize what I consider to be enthusiasm for a new idea, my boss takes as carelessness. With this thought in mind, I commit to taking more time to think things through before offering up my ideas to others. My boss also told me that she does not feel I'm a team player. And at first, I was rather surprised by this statement, but in taking some time to think this over, I realized that I don't always have the best way of pointing out the shortcomings that I perceive in a newly hatched plan. Part of the reason being that I feel somehow snubbed by her not asking me for my opinion earlier on in the process. So, with these realizations in mind, I realized that my annoyance with her inadvertently leads to her annoyance with me.
Mm-hmm.
And I must say that this is somewhat of an aha experience for me. So I commit to offering up my critique in a friendly, collaborative fashion. I remember a statement from my work in negotiation which said this: attack the idea if necessary, but do so while making it clear that you're not attacking your counterpart.
Okay, that's great stuff, Charlie, but let me just ask this question. Aren't there people out there in the world who are just jerks and really don't care about others and just tick people off? I mean, why do we have to take their behavior as our fault in the relationship?
Well, that's interesting, Tony. You know, we almost always talk about positive intention.
Mm-hmm.
And if there are some in our audience that have not listened to that series of podcasts yet, I'd suggest that they do so as a way to tap into one of our key concepts. So I assume positive intention when indeed I don't know the inner workings of another person's mind.
Right.
And I make this assumption not because I'm trying to be a nice guy.
Mm-hmm.
I make this assumption because I find that it leads to me having higher quality relationships.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, I could assume that some people are just jerks. And if I did this, where do you think this would lead me?
Well, that's a good question. So, yeah, I see what you mean. If we assume a negative, then we're going to react negatively, which in turn doesn't really help generate anything positive for anyone, including ourselves. So, good point. So I think that we covered all 5 steps, yes? How about a recap?
Yes, I think we've gone through the 5 steps of the tool, and I'd love to know how people go through these 5 steps on their own. And here's the 5-step recap.
Sure.
Step 1, in the heat of the moment, discipline yourself to say and do as little as possible. We could call step 1, bite your tongue.
Sure.
Step 2, I ask myself, can anyone else really make me angry, or do I play some role in the anger I generate?
Mm-hmm.
Step 3, we look to uncover the positive intention of our counterpart. In step 4, we rethink what took place so that we can better take in the actions of our counterpart.
Mm-hmm.
And in step 5, we consider what we'll need to do to cultivate the kind of relationship we would like to have with our counterpart going forward.
Thanks for the recap, Charlie. Really appreciate it. And I'd also like our listeners to know that we actually have a video about anger management that Charlie and I made a few years back. It's about 30 minutes long, and we think you'll find it quite interesting. It basically covers what we just discussed, but you get the chance to see how all this plays out in the realm of Aikido. So how to find it, just simply go to seishindo.org, and up in the upper right, you'll see a little search box. Type in anger management, click search, and you should see the video listed somewhat at the top of the results, if not at the top. And as always, I'd also like to take this opportunity to say that if you have any questions or feedback about this or any podcast, we'd welcome an email to us at life-tools@seishindo.org. That's life-tools@seishindo.org.
Yes, and maybe we should offer a little disclaimer in regard to the video, and that is that Tony and I were both about 10 years younger than we are today.
Absolutely, so don't be surprised.
And yes, getting feedback is the best way for you to help us to continue to enhance the podcast as well as shape the direction we should take.
Thanks so much for listening to our podcast. For more podcasts and other information, please visit us at seishindo.org.